Okay, so one of the things that the current lectures don't do, I think, is kind of draw a line through everything that you're learning to connect everything. Like we talk about tubes and the equations that you need to do stuff with tubes. And then we talk about velocity and pressure nodes and maximums. And then we haven't got there yet, but we're going to talk about vowels and consonants and how to look at these things on a spectrogram. Well, it seems like completely different things, like three completely different domains. Why are we learning about all this stuff? It's actually all the same thing. And so let's go back to 310 for a second. So 310, anatomy and physiology. This is the vocal tract. You know it. Whoa, whoa, whoa. That wasn't supposed to go yet. This is the vocal tract. The vocal tract is a tube. The vocal folds down here make this closed at that end. Now, it's true the vocal folds do little puffs of air, which mean that they're closed and then not closed. But even when they're doing the puff of air, they don't open much, right? Like we've seen the video of them. They're together and they just barely open. So it can be modeled as a closed tube, basically. The mathematical difference between like this completely closed tube and then the tiny little opening in the vocal folds is pretty much negligible. If you were going to model this like 100%, like if you were making an AI thing, like an AI speaker, not a speaker like in your car, but a speaker like a talker, you would have to maybe figure that out. But it's not anything. It's it's a couple hertz here and there. It's not a big deal. So we say that this is the closed end down at the vocal folds. That's the closed end of the tube. The tube comes up and it makes a turn. That's okay. You can have a bend in your tube. It doesn't really change the physics of the tube. Maybe it does a little bit, but again, we can model it pretty much as just a straight tube, and it doesn't sound all that different, a straight tube versus a slight curve. Then we've got the open end. The lips at the open end are usually open, so that's our open end. We've got a closed end of the tube, we've got an open end. There's one exception when this tube becomes closed. And that's when you're doing a nasal sound, so like a all of those things. On, and ing. Then you're closing your lips, or you're making a complete closure with your tongue. But then the nostrils become the open end of the tube. So we'll talk about that later, but essentially what you need to know is any sound you're making, vowel, consonant, you've got an open end of the tube and a closed end of the tube. Specifically, we're going to talk about vowels and semivowels right now because it's easier to think about that way. But we've got a closed end and an open end. So this is where we bridge the gap between anatomy and physiology and the tube that you learned how to calculate the resonant frequencies of. So let's think about the resonant waves that exist in a tube that's closed at one end. When you have a tube that's closed at one end, the closed end is always going to have a velocity node or a velocity minimum. And you can see that over here, right here on the left side of the graph. This is the larynx. This is the closed end right here. There's always a node at that side. Now the opposite is true on the other side. Where the lips are, you're always going to have a velocity maximum. No matter what size the lips are, as long as they're open, you're going to have a velocity maximum. And you can see that here. Lips are over here. There's a max, there's a max, there's a max. So all these different shapes of resonant frequency still have a node here and a velocity max over here. You know this from, like when I talk about harmonics, if you've taken 205 with me or 310, I don't think I talk about it in 367, but harmonics, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's the harmonic series. But when we're talking about the voice, we only have odd harmonics. And the reason for this is you have to have a node here and a velocity max here. So this is another shape of a sine wave, but this can't exist in a tube that's closed at one end. It just doesn't exist because you have to have a velocity max here. There's no way that you can have a node at this end. So that even harmonic is just not resonated in a tube that's closed at one end. Just the odd harmonics are. So this right here would be an even harmonic. The one behind it, this is an odd harmonic. This is the first harmonic. This is the second. It can't exist. This is the third. The fourth can't exist because you'd have a node here. This is the fifth. So this is exactly what we see when we do the calculation of n 2n minus 1. We're getting the odd harmonics only. And that's why. Okay, so let's put this into the realm of constrictions in a tube. Now we know why there's odd harmonics, because we have a velocity max here. These are the open lips, remember. The velocity max is the open lips. A constriction in a tube is not just a thing that we talk about, like here's a constriction, how does it change the frequency? The constrictions are real things that happen in the vocal tract. So like the lips, for instance, you can close the lips a little bit, or you can open them more. The tongue, you could move the tongue up. Like if this is your vocal tract, you can lift a portion of the tongue right here. If you're making an L, you lift the tongue quite a bit and make a pretty good constriction. So you can see that there's real ways that we can actually do these, that we can make these constrictions. The lips, the tongue, just the oral cavity in general, it can get smaller. The pharyngeal walls, we can tense up all the muscles that you learned about in anatomy and physiology to make the pharynx smaller. These are all constrictions. But I want to talk about just the lips at this point. So if we, right here at the end of the tube, this is where the lips are. If we make a constriction at the lips, it's always going to be at a velocity maximum. This is going to drop the frequency. So think about if I was going to say E, it's just an E phoneme, and then I'm going to close my lips while I say it. E, like that. And there's my phone ringing. Sorry. So it's the same phoneme, but I'm closing my lips to make like a W sound. So W, W to E to W to E. Well, we can look at that in a spectrogram. And this is what it looks like. Here's the W, here's the E, here's the W, here's the E, here's the W, here's the E. And I can do it with a too. So I can go W, like that. What you can see is the frequency drops at the W because there's a constriction here. So you've got W, there's a constriction, and then the constriction is lifted, and you get your E. So we or W. It doesn't come up as much for the because that's just not where the formants are for it, but you can still see the same effect at play. Whichever phoneme you're using here, whichever vowel phoneme you're using here, the W is going to drop the formant. It's going to drop this frequency because it's a constriction at a velocity maximum. So hopefully that helps you see how all of these things kind of come together. Instead of just learning three separate things, it's actually all building on one another so that when we get to looking at these spectrograms, you can put together these things that we've learned to help figure out what's going on in the mouth and the pharynx and the tongue to make these different shapes on the spectrogram. And then when you're in practice, you can look at the spectrogram to see if your client doesn't match what you should be seeing. And the way that it doesn't match could give you a clue where the problem is actually located. Are they not moving their tongue correctly? Are they not moving their lips correctly? Should the pharynx be more closed? So hopefully you can see how it all ties together. All right.